everybody. Welcome in. We'd love to know in the chat where you're coming from. Hi, Carrie. All right, we're going to make, I don't know what I just did there. All right, I'm gonna get started here in just 1 second. All righty. Welcome in, everyone, welcome in. Just a few more minutes to let people trickle into the room. Okay, great. Everyone should be able to chat, I hope. I'm gonna go in the back end just to make sure. Interesting. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and get started and then do some tech on the back end. But I want to welcome you all to Stuart's Opera House hosting of Spoken and Heard. My name is Devin Sudman, and I'm the Director of Arts Education at Stuart's Opera House. I am wearing a black button down today. I have black hair, and I'm wearing my black rimmed glasses. Stuart's Opera House is committed to our mission to be a regional leader in the arts community, a center for public expression, and an economic development partner for Southeast Ohio. We acknowledge that our historic theater sits on the traditional homelands of the Shawnee, Adena, and Hopewell peoples. We recognize the ever-present systemic inequities that stem directly from this history of colonization and commit ourselves to respecting and reconciling this long history of injustice. Stuart is committed to being more intentional in the role we can play for racial justice. We also commit to being more inclusive of people, historically and currently marginalized, based on identity, including gender, sexuality, class, and heritage. We wish to publicly express that hate has no home in our organization. For tonight, Adam Remnant, our Assistant Director of Arts Education, will be monitoring the chat and keeping an eye on the YouTube stream. But for now, what I believe is most important, I want to introduce you all to Carrie Gunter Seymour, your host for the evening. Carrie Gunter Seymour is the Poet Laureate of Ohio. Her poetry collections include Alone in the House of My Heart, Ohio University Swallow Press 2022, and A Place So Deep Inside America, It Can't Be Seen, Sheila Nagig Editions 2020, winner of the 2020 Ohio Poet of the Year Award. Her work has been featured on Verse Daily, Cultural Daily, World Literature Today, the New York Times, and Poem a Day. A ninth generation Appalachian, she is the editor of I Thought I Heard a Cardinal Sing, Ohio's Appalachian Voices, funded by the Academy of American Poets and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and the Women of Appalachia Project's anthology series, Women Speak. Gunter Seymour is a retired instructor of the E.W. Scripps School of Journalism at Ohio University, an artist in residence at the Wexner Center of the Arts, and a Pillar of Prosperity Fellow for the Foundation of Appalachian Ohio, Now, please join me in welcoming Carrie Gunter Seymour.
Hi, Devin. Hello.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi. I'm so happy to be here tonight.
I am so glad you're here.
I want to thank you and all the wonderful folks at Stuart's Opera House. And many thanks to all of you joining us this evening and all who will stream our program from Stuart's YouTube page and my personal Facebook and Twitter pages. So tonight's recording will be available just after the close of this event, and that way you can share with your friends. I also want to send out a special thanks to our ASL interpreters tonight, Joe and Nico. And thank you, Devin, for setting up transcription as well. And just as a side note, you may see us slow down our speaking or even take a pause for a few seconds to allow our interpreters to catch up. And for those who are visually challenged, I am a pale-skinned woman with long, straight gray hair. I wear glasses. The rims are tinted navy and green. And tonight I'm wearing a royal blue dress, and the collar and cuffs are blue, white, and dark gray plaid. This is our first event of the 2023 season, and I am excited. We have with us tonight Ohio's own George Bilger and Lynette Ford, and Texas-born poet, novelist, and publisher Michael Sims. We'll have a short Q&A after the readings. I want you all to feel free to type in your questions into the Q&A or the chat window, and we'll look at those later. And now, it is my great pleasure. Lynette Ford shares the gifts and heritage of the spoken word from her Afro-Latin family. Lynn's national and international festival programs and workshops encourage folks to speak personal truths and hopeful possibilities through folk tales and original stories. Her work has taken her to Ireland, Australia, and around the Zoomiverse. She is a recipient of 2 National Storytelling Network's Oracle Awards and a member of the National Association of Black Storytellers Circle of Elders and the National Writing Project's Writers Council. Her latest book, with friend and fellow teller Sherry Norfolk, is Supporting Diversity and Inclusion with Story. So Lynn and I met, it's ironically, at a celebration of the 100th anniversary of the signing of the 19th Amendment. And for those who don't know or remember, that amendment gave white women the right to vote. Shamefully, it took another 45 years for women of color to be allowed to vote. We were both asked to share our work at that event, and I immediately became a fan of Lynette Ford. Since that time, she has joined me in many other projects, one being my Women of Appalachia project anthology series. And she is one of 134 Ohio Appalachian-based poets who appear in my anthology, I Thought I Heard a Cardinal Sing, Ohio's Appalachian Voices. Well, and we presented a panel at AWP 2 weeks ago together, and another at the Appalachian Studies Association conference last week. So we've been seeing quite a bit of each other, which makes me very happy. I'm so proud to call her friend. Please welcome Lynette Ford.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm so excited to be at Stuart's Opera House with such wonderful people, but still in the Zoomiverse so that others can join us. I'm going to share some poems from my own book that I'm putting together. The working title right now is Shadows, Illusions, Grandmothers, and Dreams. The first poem is called Reading. Some folks interpret me, claim they know me like the noonday sun. They don't seem to notice As day sweeps toward day's end, I have shadows too. Shadows that stretch and shrink, mimicking reality. They punctuate the paragraphs of me, darkness for my light. This is life. I write the rough draft, but I don't remember the beginning. And the plot has changed since then. I may foreshadow, but I doubt that I'll know the final word. The days will sweep toward day's end, and I'll simply close the book. Some folks may constantly smile as they remember chapters, claiming they knew me like noonday sunshine. That's fiction. Don't believe it. They've probably revised the story. The next one was included in the collection called Women Speak, Volume 8, which is a recent publication. Africa's Memory speaks from Appalachian Hill. Old Earth, the grandmother of Mother Africa. Coal here was born there, where traces of now began as dreams. The promise of diamonds, hidden in land, massed as the core of continents. Rifts and breaks and slow collisions celebrated the world's grandmother. When we walk the Appalachian Trail, we touch earth that was Africa. Memory set in stone. Eons of heritage. That time, once, when the continents were one. Rifts and breaks and slow collisions, transformations and separations. Grandmother's heart quivering, shuddering, shaping mountains. Grandmother's tears flowing, forming, rendering creeks, runs, rivers, oceans, in time before time. Ancestral elevations of sacred homeland are soft blue-colored mountains. Low green hills, some misformed and misinformed by human minds and hands. Yet still they whisper the labor of their birth. The history bleached nearly white, except for the coal. Once these mountains were the edge of Africa. Stand here now and know these hills are still our blessed grandmother. She who waits here to uplift us. Spirit of that place of birthing beyond generations. We who are Afralacha must speak testaments, stories formed in the soul of the grandmother of Mother Africa. We may be ignored by others, but we are not forgotten by the earth. We must stand here now, all ourselves and one. Africa's memory speaks from Appalachian Hill. The title of that poem is All Ourselves and One, and it refers to the time 480 million years ago when the Appalachian Ouachita Mountains and the neighboring Little Atlas Mountains were connected in what is now Morocco. The next poem is called Gone, and it refers to memories from my growing up, spending time in East Liverpool, Ohio. Ancient pines and wireless telephone poles line the edge of a trail, too narrow to be called a road. That trail parallels broken tracks where coal-fueled trains once provoked a dream of travel and far away, punctuated by rattling wheel sets, chanting, gone, far gone, now gone, far gone, now gone. I'm going to share two poems from a cycle of verse that is tentatively titled Insanities. Insanities, 1950s to the 2020s. Nightmares are stories. Let me tell you ours. We were given a gift, a heritage of genius, of talents, of high intellect. Yet someone else's version of our history mixed the reality with their lies, turned it all into an overdose of bat crap crazy, and called it our life, called it public school education. It was informing, but it was not our story. Instilled in post-traumatic stress, wrapped in what somebody called learning. Only one side of the story, protested by those who carried the reality on their faces, and some refused to hear. Some still do, because hearing brings on the adventure of anxiety, because they too would face that place called pain. But sometimes going there is a journey toward the truth. The second one is Insanities, 1990s to the rebirth in the now. I was a child of those who persevered, but tried to hide the pain of the past, yet passed it on. I am not their secrets. I am no longer a child. I do not hide the stories we still live. I have told the children to listen, to watch, to see, to know, to fight, to shout, to scream, to live, so that we can be whole. We can be, because in truth we are, if we remember everything, if we speak it and still strive to thrive, not just survive, if we shine like the light as we fight against someone else's darkness, if we speak our truths, know our realities, acknowledge, then break the bonds of man-made madness, our PTSD variant, if we use the knowledge of daring minds, of spirits stronger than any chains, of impressions beyond obsession, of intentions, not addictions, of voices lifted in affirmation, voices louder than any maddening cry, voices once lessened to small, but never still. If we use the sharp edges of our nightmares and the unhealed wounds of memories to keep us strong, we can be ourselves. We are righteous in our eagerness to break the cycle, to build our circle. In this time, we are the ones we must be. That is our story now. I'm really appreciating the interpreter. Thank you. The next two poems are from what I like to call the Shadows chapter. The first one is called Ghoul. Slowly, slowly, she lifted the veil. It floated above her, ephemeral, anchored in her fingertips. I expected it and her to disappear as unreal things do. I thought, if I blink, she will be gone. I closed my eyes. I opened them. Dark and graceful, silent and as real as air, she glided toward me. Her eyes were the color of the moon. The second is called Haint, and it was published in Women Speak, Volume 8. She thought she heard footfall, so soft it was a dream, like sheer curtain, torn and dancing, dark fairy wing zuzzing, a sound lost in cobwebs, in dusty corners, in memory, in moonlight, like someone waving away a thought just as she opened the door. She thought she saw something of shadow between the ticks of twilight. There, no, there, yes, someone, like bits of dust, shimmering out of frame near the rim of her eye. The last thing I'm going to share with you this evening, for which I'm so grateful, is an old folk tale that has been shared all the way from Western Europe into the northwestern part of the United States among indigenous people in the United States, but carried from Europe. It's called How Dragonfly Came to Be. In the long ago times, when the world was new and things had not quite settled into what they would someday be, Creator was resting after days of hard work. Now up hopped Frog, and Frog was unhappy with his huge, faceted eyes. He wanted simpler ones. Creator gave him the eyes that he wears today and held the rest of that in his great hand. Frog hopped away and Butterfly fluttered down. Now she didn't like her long stick-like body. Creator broke off half of her lengthy twig-like form, but she kept the wings. She liked those. And Creator held the rest in his great hand. Away fluttered butterfly, but spider crept up creator's leg. Spider had 14 legs and argued that 8 legs were enough. Creator granted spider's desire and kept the rest in his great hand. But complaints continued. Bee wanted skinnier wings, not long, gauzy ones. It was granted. And lastly, shy lizard, who didn't like bright colors that shone in sunlight, begged to be able to blend in with her surroundings, for privacy, for hiding. Granted. Creator looked at all the pieces and parts he held in his great hand. Creator wondered, what should I do with these? Now he could have tossed them over his shoulder, but that would be wasteful. Creator stared at the faceted eyes, the stick body, the slender legs, the gauze wings, and the bright colors. Yes, gently blowing into his cupped hands, he smiled as he fashioned one last creature. He opened his hands, and from them emerged a dragonfly. And she was beautiful, as all creation was, and all creation should be. Thank you for listening.
Oh my goodness, Lynn, thank you so much. That was so beautiful. And I made a few notes here. I love your poem about the world's grandmother. Her heart, I won't get this exactly right, but heart quivering, shuddering, shaping mountains.
Yes.
And then later to her tears forming the creeks and the rivers and the oceans. That's such a beautiful visual. And then I love that you educate us when you remind us that when the continents were one, these mountains were the edge of Africa.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we forget that we were all one, that we literally shared the planet, as equals. And it gives me goosebumps because we all know, and you mentioned this in one of your other poems, the history books don't tell that story. The history books tell the story they want us to know, the stories they want us to remember, but you're telling the story, Lynn. And then later you said, I do not hide the stories, we still live. And I so appreciate that. The nightmares are stories. Let me tell you ours.
Yes.
And you so beautifully share what we have done to our sisters and brothers of color. And then you say the most beautiful thing ever. And you say, we may be ignored by others, but we are not forgotten by the earth.
Yes.
And that just brings me to my knees. And I love that so much. And I want to thank you so much for bringing those beautiful words into our space tonight. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Carrie, for inviting me.
Well, it's been marvelous. And we'll talk a little more later, too.
Sure. Thank you.
Hey. Well, okay. So Michael Sims, who identifies as a person with autism, is the founder of Vox Populi, an online forum for poetry, politics, and nature. He is as well the founder of Autumn House Press, a non-profit publisher of books. He's the author of 3 full-length collections of poetry, including American Ash and Nightjar from Ragged Sky, the co-editor of a college textbook about poetry, and the lead editor of over 100 published books, including the best-selling Autumn House Anthology of Contemporary Poetry, now in its 3rd edition. In 2011, the Pennsylvania legislature awarded Sims a certificate of recognition for his contribution to the arts. He is also an environmental activist, having twice addressed the Allegheny County Council on the issue of fracking in public parks. His novels, Bicycles of the Gods, A Divine Comedy, and The Green Mage are available from Madville Publishing, and I believe The Green Mage just came out. So I met Michael, as I have so many others, through poetry on social media. Of course, through his nationally acclaimed Vox Populi. But Michael changes lives with his posts. You need to know that. He goes out of his way to seek out new voices, important voices that might not otherwise be heard. And so many of us are so grateful for Michael's support and have reaped the rewards from it. And I am so proud to present Michael Sims.
Thank you, Carrie. I appreciate all that you do for poets and poetry, for organizing this event. Thank you. I'm pleased to be included. I've lived most of my life in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on a mountain in the middle of Pittsburgh called Mount Washington. And my wife and I love it there, and we've raised our children, and we're deeply embedded in the community there. And if you go to the end of our street and look over the cliff, you can see the Mon Valley, which is the Monongahela River, and that neighborhood below ours is called the South Side, and it is primarily and traditionally a Ukrainian neighborhood. So a lot of the poems I'll be reading here, I'll read 8 poems. They take place in Mount Washington. The first poem I'll read is called Second to Last Testament. It was originally called Last Testament, but I wrote another poem called Last Testament, so this one became Second to Last Testament. Second to Last Testament. Since I never cared about anything but love and beauty, you can do whatever you want with this brittle husk when I'm done with it. Let the body find its own bright scattering. Toss my ashes into the wind for all I care. Let them drift into the Mon Valley to mix with the unpretentious love of the parishioners of St. John the Baptist Ukrainian Catholic Church, straight down the mountain from us, where old women stuff pierogies to repair the golden onion on the roof and raise money for the orphanage in their hometown of Vortzel, outside Kiev, bombed last month. Every Saturday, they make exactly 1,000 pierogies, bag them by the dozen, grab their mops and pails, and scrub the granite floor beside the sacristy until the priest is walking on light. My community and my family have been badly damaged by the scourge of the opioid epidemic. And this next poem is called Zed, the last letter of the alphabet. And it's addressed to a friend of mine. Zed. Somehow, I always believed if we live faultless lives, kind and generous, if we sit at the bedside of those who have no one else, if we bend to rub the ears of the dog hungry for small attentions, rock the baby in our arms so mom can sleep in the next room. Hours sliding by like gentle ghosts. If we sit down with the small boy and carve the alphabet to Z, if we ask the name of the doll held so sweetly in the little girl's arms, if we kindly lie, praising the bland dish served with love as we visit the home of an old friend, sit on the patio, watch monarchs land on milkweed, halfway to the place ancient memory calls home, because we have no other life than this one. If we remember the far boat of long ago, where a boy and an old man cast their lines into the still water of evening. If we are kind to ourselves, we can be kind to others, and then we'll be protected. Our children will be safe. We can leave this earth in peace. Oh, my dear friend, I remember how you held your baby in your arms as we sat in the grass on a summer day, and we never imagined we'd outlive our children. All the poems that I'm reading today have been written over the last 4 to 6 weeks, and they're brand new. This is their maiden voyage, so to speak, except for this one. This next poem, called Sometimes I Wake Early, was written some time ago, 20 years ago, but it too takes place in Mount Washington. Sometimes I wake early and walk through the house, touching doors that swing into darkness, my bare toes searching out toys and magazines. Outside, it might be raining, a full wind filling the trees like sails. I sit in the love seat under the bay window, hugging myself, letting the children's dreams wash over me like waves. Last night, we took a friend for a walk along the edge of our mountain. She looked out over the city, the rivers, the sultry slopes crowded with sumac and maple, and said, "So you know where you live?" Yes, in the darkness and rain. Our small house stands in a huddle of houses under the clouds in a story we ourselves are telling. Back to the present. This poem was written about a month ago. It's called Now. You wonder what becomes of all that's seen and done, not the big things, the birth of your daughter, forgiving your father, but the small goings on, drying a favorite cup carefully, putting it just so on the shelf next to the others, lined up like the many days behind you. Saucers stacked, news and music turning in the dance. What about waking next to the person you love? How many thousands of joys in that single moment repeated morning after morning until today you woke and she's gone, flying through the clouds on her way somewhere you don't want to go. Joy. Joy is a foreign language to me, the way it trips into the room with a care in the world, letting the dog drool, the baby sleep, the woman weep as she remembers the kindness of her father. Joy is a stranger who comes to the door with small gifts and a big soul. My friend Valerie fills the room with laughter, leaving no one out, no one at a loss. Everyone is praised for their imperfections. Joy is a language she speaks with ease and teaches me to speak from deep in my chest, the guttural rumblings of knowing how things have gone wrong for the best. This next one is a prose poem. My wife and I live in Mount Washington, just down the street from a dog park. And we take our dog Josie down there often. And Josie is rather mischievous and plays tricks on the other dogs. She's very smart and she entertains herself that way. So somehow that got mixed in with my work as an editor and a blurber and a recommender and a reviewer. And somehow out of that mess, this poem came. It's meant to be funny. It's perfectly okay to laugh. I hope you do laugh. Puppy rolling. A poet asked me to write a blurb for the back cover of his new book. I said yes, and wrote a few nice things about his poems. He wrote back saying he'd tweaked my blurb and sent the new version. Man, it was nothing like what I'd written. But the thing is, it made me look really smart, like I completely understood the inner workings and meanings of his poems, almost as if I were living in the poet's mind when he was writing the damn things, as if I'd stayed up late with him discussing whether fresh as a daisy is, well, fresh enough for a poem. So I said, yes, go ahead. Use the blurb you wrote. It's much better than mine because the way I see it, writing blurbs is kind of like puppy rolling. Say what, you say? It's like this. When I take Josie to the dog park, she likes to find a puppy, preferably a rare breed like a Shiba Inu or a New Guinea singing dog, and roll it down the hill. It doesn't hurt the puppies. In fact, they seem to enjoy being rolled, but sometimes the owner, usually somebody who's never accidentally dropped a baby or stuck a baby with a safety pin or taken eyes off the kid for 5 minutes and had to run into traffic to save it, somebody who thinks puppies are fragile gets upset and tells me to stop rolling her puppy, which I can't really do, my dog having a mind of her own. So we just have to leave the park. All of this explains why, when the poetry critic posted a comment saying he disagreed with the blurb, I didn't actually write, what could I say? It wasn't my dog? Instead, I just said, I understand his concern over the fragility of American poetry, it being a rare breed and all, and unfriended him. I'm originally from the South, although I've lived in Pittsburgh a long time, but I still like turnip greens. It's a traditional food of Southerners. One of the reasons I like it is that it always reminds me of my sister, who's passed away now. And so here's a poem called Turnip Greens. You can never be lonely washing turnip greens in the sink. The tender ones with the least bite, picked in May before the root swells, the heavy, virtuous stalks, the leaves waiting twice for baptism, once in the sink, once in the pot. Memory nourishes like the whole pot of soup you and your sister ate, thick with greens, potatoes, white beans soaked overnight, outweighing your hunger. You lifted a spoon to her lips, then yours, again and again. Impatient as always, she grabbed the spoon from your hand, and the two of you stood over the stove, laughing, eating, mopping the last of the broth with brown bread. Then you sat at the table and talked for hours. She remembered the tall sycamore she climbed years before, higher than the boys, happiness far away. Besides my dog Josie, my favorite animals are crows. And you may know that crows are highly intelligent and can actually recognize human faces. They can tell us apart. And they even remember faces from when one has done them dirty. They will tell the other crows to avoid that person or even to bomb him. So crows are wonderful. They are our little brothers, so to speak, and sisters. The crows. We barely recognized ourselves, but the crows knew who we were and where we'd been, why we returned without meaning to. Perhaps they recognized our regret as theirs, or perhaps it was just we had changed everything but our faces, which we held in place with effort, not wanting to admit how wrong we've been, how far away. The last poem I'll read is longer than the previous ones. It's a story. It's in verse, but it's a narrative poem. And it's a true story of something that happened 40 years ago. I was a graduate student in Iowa City, and my friend Stanley and I used to drink at a bar close to campus called George's. And one day we were in there and we were drinking, and a strange thing happened. We met a strange person. This is the story of that incident. Stanley, by the way, is a scholar of the Book of Enoch. He wrote his dissertation on the Book of Enoch, which is part of the Apocrypha. Dead Sea. Is it really wise to question a summary of a translation, of a scroll found in a cave by a boy looking for his lost goat, when the alternative is the amber light that shines through a whiskey bottle in front of a mirror that holds my own face held up by my own hands? The answer is always, maybe, sort of, depending on who's sitting on the next bar stool and whether he's actually read the summary of Enoch's travels through heaven, still alive to the possibility that a vision is a dream wearing suspenders. Like Stanley here, part-time divinity student, full-time drunkard, fantasist, adulterer, who is sadly the wisest person I know, or at least the smartest person still talking to me when this tall guy walks in, only slightly older than me, but without the Dead Sea eyes like mine and Stanley's. And the guy looks directly at me, or at least the part of me that's sitting here on a bar stool wasting my life. And he says, "Are you Michael Sims?" And I look around, hoping for a twin separated at birth. But it's just me, Stanley, and 40 ex-friends. So I say, "Uh-huh." And this guy says, "I have a poem for you." And I say, "Okay, shoot." And he recites a dozen lines about walking down the street right here in River City and having an honest to God epiphany where the stars become brighter and the moon fuller and stained glass lights the way to a door, like Enoch entering heaven to find the inside is larger than the outside, which is how I've always thought of Stanley and me and this whole scurvy world. And Mr. Epiphany, this angel, I think he must be an angel because all the other positions have been filled. Having delivered his message, turns around and walks away. I borrow a pen from the bartender and try to write down the poem, but it's gone. All I remember is the word acquiescent, which Stanley says is not a word. The word is acquiescence, he says, but somehow the wrong word is the right word, like the light coming from the mirror, reflecting the faces, reflecting the light from the moon, reflecting the light from the sun 1,000,000 miles away. But somehow it's enough, or almost enough. Stanley and I sit for a while, and he tells me he's been fired from his job as assistant pastor. And then 10 years later, I get sober and have my own epiphany. A half-assed one, I still baby along, like an old Chevy that keeps breaking down. Thank you so much for listening. I think this is wonderful. I'm honored to be reading with two wonderful poets and being introduced by a wonderful poet herself, Carrie. And thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, Michael, thank you. I've got so many notes here. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to see them all. I wanted to start with the idea of I'm so glad you're writing about addiction. That's so important to me. That's been a large part of my laureateship in Ohio, is working with women in recovery and incarcerated teens and adults who are suffering and trying to recover from addiction. And one of the lines that really got me is, if we kindly lie, if we kindly tell lies and watch monarchs land on milkweed, if we can just allow them to have some beauty in their lives, that's how we begin to help them heal. And so, yeah, if we kindly lie, and then you go on to say, if we are kind to ourselves, we can be kind to others, and then we'll be protected, and so will our children, and then we can leave this earth in peace. And I know I didn't say that exactly the way you wrote it, but I mean, I think that I want that to be my new mantra. That is so beautiful. And I appreciate so much the positivity that you shared with us tonight. Everyone is praised for their imperfectionisms. And then you later say how things have gone wrong for the best. Because oftentimes that is how it is. Something seems to like, oh, I can't believe that happened. And then you find out later that it really was for the best, that it did. And I think that I love Mount Washington, because if this is where all those poems came from, then I love it there. I'm also a Crow fan. I have a new book coming out soon called Dirt Songs, and it's got lots of Crow poems in there, or poems with crows, so we have that. in common. And then I don't think any of us can be here tonight without loving that blurb poem. I mean, I don't know about you, but I get asked so much. And I honestly can't take very many with my schedule, but you do want to help people. And it always tickles me when people want to, kind of edit them. Like you said, that can get everybody into trouble when that kind of stuff starts happening. So I just love that. And I just thank you for your positivity and giving us a laugh and just maybe helping us think about our own imperfections and overlooking some of those. So thank you, Michael, so much for being here tonight. It means the world to me.
Thank you, Carrie, for all you do. I'm honored to be working on projects with you and be reading your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we still have one more person with us this evening that I'm so excited to hear from. George Bilger's work has been called a welcome breath of fresh contemporary air in the House of American Poetry by former U.S. Poet Laureate Billy Collins. Bilger has read his poems at the Library of Congress, the 92nd Street Y in New York, the Chautauqua Institute, and the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. NPR listeners know him from his many appearances on Garrison Keillor's, I'm so sorry, The Writer's Almanac and A Prairie Home Companion. He's received grants and awards from the Pushcart Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Fulbright Foundation. He's a recipient of the May Swenson Poetry Award, the Society of Midland Authors Poetry Prize, the Ohio Anna Poetry Award, the Cleveland Arts Prize, and a Witter Burner Fellowship through the Library of Congress. His 8th collection of poetry, Central Air, was published by the University of Pittsburgh Press in just last year, March of 2022. He teaches at John Carroll University in Cleveland, Ohio, where he lives with his wife and 2 exceptionally fine little boys. And I had the great honor of meeting and reading at an event that George was headlining in the Hocking Hills this past fall. And you simply cannot not love George once you meet him, or especially once you hear him read. He's witty, he's kind, he's so very giving of himself to others, and his students love him. Many of you have likely already heard George read, perhaps just a recording, but for those of you who have not, you are in for such a treat, as they say, and please welcome the marvelous George Bilger. George.
Wow. Carrie, thank you. That's an incredible introduction. And it makes me sound a lot more impressive than I am, because I'm sitting here eating a bag of Tostitos because I got home late and didn't have a chance to have dinner. So what poetry reading has ever been introduced by, blurbing Tostitos? I want to say a couple of things. First of all, Lynette, we have not met, and I'm so sorry about that, because we have to meet on the poetry trail, because I loved your reading, and those 2 poems called Insanities. I want to contact you later and get those, because I want to show those to my classes. And of course, Michael, I want to say to everyone watching tonight, Michael Sims he has helped so many poets in the United States in so many ways, and I'm one of them. And Michael approached me about publishing one of my books, a book called The White Museum. And of all the books I've published, it's the most handsome, the most beautiful, the most fully imagined and well rendered book I've ever published. And the Autumn House Press is just stunning. And the book came out, and then Michael and his wife invited my wife and me to come down to Pittsburgh from Cleveland and have dinner with them. And it was just such a gracious and marvelous thing to do, Michael. And I've been eternally grateful to you for all you've done for me. And finally, whoa, Cleveland, Ohio, every city in Ohio, every nook and corner of the state has been affected by the brilliant work of our current state poet laureate, Carrie Gunter Seymour. Carrie, I don't know how you do it, but you seem to be capable of being everywhere at the same time. And she has done such extraordinary things for poetry in the state. I'm stunned by her energy and the brilliance of her poetry. And yeah, it was a real honor for me to have a chance to read with Carrie last year. Anyone who's met her will be mesmerized by her work. So, man, the next poet laureate has got some big shoes to fill. So I'm going to read some poems tonight. And thanks for sticking with us. It's kind of a long evening. You know, there's an old saying in the poetry reading world, nothing lasts forever except a poetry reading. So I have some poems on the list to read to you, and I'm going to cut them down by a couple of poems, and I will let the interpreters know before I read them. But I'm going to start with a poem called Icarus. And those of you who remember your 8th grade mythology know that Icarus was the son of a carpenter named Daedalus. And in Greek mythology, Daedalus and Icarus were imprisoned by an evil king, King Minos, in the labyrinth. And Daedalus came up, brilliant creator that he was, with a way to escape. He said, we will gather birds' feathers and beeswax and fashion wings, and we will fly out of the labyrinth. But he cautioned his son, do not fly too close to the sun, because if you do, the wax will melt and you will fall to your death. But Icarus, being young, heedless, a kid, did not obey his father. So this has a lot to do with our current obsession with digital gizmos. And here we go. Icarus. The lifeguard was texting. The man at the gas station was sexting. And everyone in the park was tweeting. And the waiter at Pete's was Instagramming. And all the diners on the patio were FaceTiming, except for one old guy stuck in the past who was actually emailing. As for the people at the bus stop, they were just plain old on the phone. But the little girl at her lemonade stand on the lawn in front of her house had her head in the clouds, double parked above the town. So she was the only one who saw him fall, the beautiful boy trailing feathers from the sky above Cleveland, where basically nothing ever happens. So when I travel around giving readings, I say to the people I meet, often parents of university students, if you want your kids to become poets, you have to become an alcoholic. Yeah, that's right. Because if alcoholic parents produce poetic children, because they just have to learn to deal with the madness and the insanity and the terror of parents whose every move is completely crazy and unpredictable. So my dad was a fierce, relentless, and insane drinker. He died of alcoholism. And his progress to death via scotch is really the central story of my youth. So here's a poem about an early memory of my father. It's called The Forge. I remember seeing my father stop halfway up the driveway because my tricycle was blocking the way to the garage, and how he solved the problem by picking up the tricycle by the handlebars and smashing it through the windshield of our brand new family station wagon, his face red with scotch, his black tie and jacket flapping with effort, the tricycle making its way a little farther with each blow into the roomy interior of the latest model as the safety glass relented, the tricycle and the windshield, both praiseworthy in their toughness, the struggle between them somehow making perfect sense in midday on our quiet suburban street. The windshield, the anvil, the trike, the hammer, the marriage, the forge, and failure, glowing in the heat, beaten and tempered, slowly taking shape. So I'm like the world's oldest fairly new dad. And not too many years ago, I had the extraordinary experience of seeing two wonderful young boys born. And for those of you men who have been in the birthing room, you know that seeing this is, really is the most extraordinary thing you've ever seen in your life. It's astonishing. It's amazing. It's incomprehensibly beautiful to you, but not necessarily to everyone else in that room. And that's what this poem is about. The poem is called Push, and it's about the birth of my son, Alex. I'm trying to look as if I'm suffering. I have this anguished expression on my face, but it's wasted since I'm wearing a surgical mask. And anyway, the focus here is really on my wife, and the doctor is right there between her legs, and he's shouting, "Push!" And my wife is doing this astounding thing. She's pushing yet another human being into the world, a world that so far seems to be pushing back. And the baby's heartbeat is down to 90. So the doc says, I think maybe one more try. Then we'll have to do the cesarean. So things in the room are really a bit tense. It's definitely a moment that demands a lot of attention, and my wife is gathering whatever shreds of strength remain in the shaking, exhausted sleeve of flesh. Her body has become the blood and sweat and fluids everywhere, and this is it. When I hear the attending nurse standing just behind me saying to this guy in scrubs standing next to her, I think he's the anesthesiologist's assistant, well, just because Karen says she has a boyfriend doesn't necessarily mean she won't go out with you. And the guy says, his voice rising because my wife really is screaming quite loudly at this point, yeah, okay, I guess I should give it a try. I mean, what's the worst that can happen other than getting shot down and looking like a total fool. And the nurse says, as the doctor is shouting, "Push!" "Yeah, but hasn't it been like a long dry spell for you? Aren't you getting a little desperate here?" And the guy laughs, and my wife screams again, and the doctor says, "Yes!" And into the world comes the bloody head, followed by the naked, lovely, bloody little boy, insanely ill prepared for any of this. And I guess the guy is actually going to ask Karen out. And I say, go for it. And I hope he did, and is prepared for the consequences, which involve the braces and college education. Here's a poem whose title is such a lovely old American word, an American word like Coke or Ford. Did anyone here have a Schwinn when they were kids, a Schwinn bike? That was basically the only bike available when I was a child, and I had a Schwinn. This is a poem not really about my Schwinn bicycle, about my dear mother, who, after my father's death, had to raise 3 kids on a nurse's salary. Schwinn. Once, when I was about 12, my mother astonished me by getting astride my bike, the heavy old balloon-tired Schwinn I used for my afternoon paper route, and pedaling away down our block, her hair blown back, skirts flying, a girl again in the wind and speed that had nothing to do with pulling double shifts at the hospital, or cooking meatloaf, or sewing up my blue jeans. My old workhorse bicycle carrying her away from my father dead of booze, her nightly bottle of red wine in front of the news. She flew down the street so far, I could barely see her. Then slowly pedaled back to me, stepped off the bike, my mom again. And I'm going to, in interest of time, it's getting late, I'm going to skip over this poem, Garbage Disposal Interpreters, and I'm going to go straight to a poem called The Scar, okay? And I think before I read this poem to you, I want to mention there's the name Phidias, who was a Greek sculptor noted for his extraordinarily delicate and beautifully crafted busts, heads of his subjects. The Scar. My son slipped on the ladder to the pool and smacked his head. Blood pooling on his small shoulders. The doctor stitching him whole. 3 years on, after a haircut, the scar still rises. A quarter moon, a woman will ask about as they lie there one night. Her fingers in his hair, her voice in his ear, the secret delight of him, a bit like burnt toast, in her nostrils as she takes his strangeness into her. What she won't know is how the frail Phidian skull I held that day in my hands resounded on the hot concrete. It echoed all summer, less like an egg cracking in a bowl or a world breaking than the wild beating of love against my heart. Dear girl who will one day win him, that part of the boy is mine. And interpreters, I'm going to move past this poem called Anna Karenina, straight to a poem called Genius. And so to the thousands of millions of you listening around the world, I just want to say, how many of you have won a MacArthur Genius Grant? No? Am I the only one here? No, I'm just kidding. I have not won a MacArthur Genius Grant. I certainly would like to. For those of you who don't know this, it's a real game changer in your career. It pays $500,000, but I don't need the money. I teach. Pause for laughter. It's not the money that I want. It's the fact that you are now an official genius, and people have to call you a genius. And I think about what my wife would do with this. Like, weren't you supposed to take the trash out today? Genius. Or weren't you supposed to empty the kitty litter box? Genius. So, no, I've never won one. But I had an experience that kind of brought me close to it. And that's what this poem is about, genius. It was nice being a genius worth $500,000 for the 2 or 3 minutes it took me to walk back to my house from the mailbox with the letter from the foundation trembling in my hand. Frankly, for the first minute, I was somewhat surprised at being a genius. I'd only published a few small things at that point. I didn't even have a book. I was just a part-time lecturer at a small Midwestern college. But early into the second minute, I had fully embraced the fact of my genius. I mean, these people know what they're doing, right? Who am I to tell the foundation its business? And I was already practicing the kind of modest, hey, it's no big deal kind of voice I'd be using on the phone for the rest of the day as I called my friends and especially my enemies to treat them to the good news. But when I opened the letter and saw it was merely a request for me to recommend someone else to be a genius, I lost interest and made myself a ham sandwich. And I just want to say to those of you novice apprentice poets out there who are wondering, how to end your poems. Occasionally that's really difficult. That last line, I made myself a ham sandwich, that can work at the end of any poem, any poem. So I've tried it at the end of Paradise Lost. Works. No need to thank me. So you go through life and you work hard and you play by the rules. And you feel like maybe you've attained a certain level of success and you feel happy with what you've done. But that sense of, success, of having made it, it's so fragile. The ego is so fragile. And that's what this poem is about. It takes place, I live here in Cleveland. Takes place at our local public pool here in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. And the poem is called horseplay. I am floating in the public pool. An older guy who has achieved much, including a mortgage, 2 children, and health insurance, including dental. I have a Premier Rewards Gold Card from American Express, and my car is large. I have traveled to Finland. In addition, I once met Toni Morrison at a book signing and made some remarks she found extremely interesting. And last month, I was the subject of a local news story called Recyclers, Neighbors Who Care. In short, I am not someone you would take lightly. But when I begin to playfully splash my wife, the teenage lifeguard raises her megaphone and calls down from her throne, "No horseplay in the pool." And suddenly, I am 12 again, a pale worm at the feet of a blonde and sun-tanned goddess. And I just wish my mom would come pick me up. I'm going to read 2 more poems for you. This one is called Call of the Fox. And it's for my wife, Jody. The summer we rented a cottage in the woods, we would waken in the middle of the night to the mating call of the foxes. It sounds like one of my freshmen barfing up hot dogs and wild turkey after his first frat party, a sound that makes you want to puke yourself out of sympathy or sheer disgust with the whole situation. How the imperatives of desire drive us into the dark woods, sick with the incandescent loneliness of the flesh. However, after listening for a while, my wife remarked that it was actually kind of funny, as if nature, usually so careful about beauty, about getting it just right, had for once screwed up and created something even Mary Oliver couldn't get behind. And then we thought, well, since we're up anyway, and there's nothing else to do, which is why my wife is my wife. And thanks again for putting up with me so late in the night. I'm so happy you're all here. And thanks again to Carrie Gunter Seymour for making this possible. The last poem I'd like to read is for my son, Michael. And the poem is called Weather. My father would lift me to the ceiling in his big hands and ask, "How's the weather up there?" And it was good. The weather of being in his hands, his breath of scotch and cigarettes, his face smiling from the world below. "Oh, Daddy," was the lullaby I sang back down to him as he stood on earth. My great white-shirted father, home from work, his gold wristwatch and wedding band gleaming as he held me above him for as long as he could before his strength failed down there in the world I find myself standing in tonight. My little boy looking down from his flight below the ceiling, cradled in my hands, his eyes wide and already staring into the distance beyond the man, asking him again and again, how's the weather up there? Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Oh, George. Oh my goodness. Oh, what a wonderful reading. As always, thank you so much. And I'll just say a few words because I know, as you say, it's getting late. Uh, Whenever you read the poem about your dad and the tricycle, I weep. I wait for you. I wait for him. I wait for your mother. I wait for the entire family. And I just want to hug you harder than anybody ever has. Every time I hear you read it, it's a gorgeous poem. And then you give us the poem about your mother and the bicycle. And that beautiful poem of this marvelous woman who raised 3 boys, like you said, on a nurse's salary and probably really difficult hours working and everything. Such a beautiful poem and an ode to both of your parents for different reasons. And it's just so beautiful. But then you still can joke with us and you coach us and you give us so much of yourself, and your sharp wit is perhaps the best gift of all that you provide to the world. And I thank you so much for that, George. And enjoyed your comment about I don't need the money, I teach. Yeah. And I loved your genius poem, of course, but I think what I love the most is it just comes out here and there, but you personally have got great, big, wonderful daddy love. And I'm so glad of that. I'm just so happy for that and for your own family and your kids. And that seems like such a blessing. So thank you so much for an amazing, as always, an amazing reading. And just to remind everybody, you can buy all of our guest books tonight right off the chat. I've put them in the window. Or for those who are going to watch later, if you go to the Stuart's Opera House website, all of the books and their links are listed there. And so you can buy our guests' books. That way you don't have to go looking for them on the internet. And I'm going to suggest we all turn our cameras on. And I'm just going to ask 3 very quick questions because our audience always loves for us to have a question time. And I don't think we have anybody else asking any. I don't see any here. So I'm going to ask mine, if y'all don't mind. So I'll start with Lynn. And I thought we might like to hear more about the National Association of Black Storytellers Circle of Elders. And if you're allowed to, unless it's a secret society, I'd love to hear more about it.
No, it's not a secret society. I wish more people knew about it. When you reach a certain age, and I won't say the age because some people don't want to admit they're that old, but they do want the award. You may be inducted into the Circle of Elders. And one of the greatest things about that is at our national festival and conference, we join with the young people and we actually have a circle in which the elders are sitting in the chairs and the young people are sitting at our feet. And we share with them something about our lives, something that can help them with their own resilience and their self-growth, their self-development, maybe give them some things to think about, or perhaps some history that they don't know. And they can ask us any questions, and it builds a connection between the elders and the young people, and hopefully extends their foundation and their knowledge base so that they can become loving and wise elders. I'm not going to say we're all wise, but we try to be when we're with the young people.
Oh, that's lovely. I just love that. Thank you, Lynn. Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, Michael, I had a question for you because I don't know the answer to this. And perhaps I haven't looked far enough, but I wanted to know about the history of Vox Populi. I wondered, what was your vision? How did this all start? Because, like George said, you have literally changed and uplifted so many lives. And I thought people would love to hear about that. And we need you to turn on your mic.
Thank you so much. I hope my mic was on when I was reading, but what's done is done, right? uh, Vox Populi started in 2014. I was active in an anti-fracking group here in Allegheny County, which is Pittsburgh. And we were all scattered out and we were doing various kinds of events, various protests and writing articles and other things. And so I started Vox Populi as sort of a place where we could gather and we could see what each other were doing. So I was writing videos there and some poetry and some other things. I like publishing the poetry because I love poetry, but also it kept the website from being too geeky. I mean, too technical, because we had some engineering and biochemists and others posting there. So we started just with that core group of 30 or 40 people who were active in the community against fracking. And it grew. We lost the battle about fracking, but Vox Populi continued growing and it began taking on other issues as well. It was primarily political and environmental when it started, but being who I am, I kept putting poetry in there too. So now it's primarily poetry, but it's kept its political focus, progressive, pro-feminist, pro-LGBTQ, and it has been a success. We now have about 16,000 subscribers, and about a third of those are overseas. I'm glad to see my friend Rosemary, who lives in South America, here tonight. And she's been a long-term subscriber, and she's also contributed some translations. So it continues to grow. And as it grows, the prominence of the authors, the poets and the prose writers, continues to grow. We've published poems by Akira Kurosawa. We've published poems by Naomi Shihab Nye and Rita Dove and others, by Carrie Gunter Seymour. And I'm pleased with it. It takes a lot of time. It's about 2 hours a day for me, but I don't mind the time because it's something that I enjoy doing. And it's not nearly as much work as running a publishing company. I retired from Autumn House 8 years ago because it was just too much work. I couldn't do that and do other things too. So I turned it over to my long-suffering assistant, Christine Strout, and she's just done wonderful work with it. So everybody came out ahead. So does that help at all?
Yes, that was perfect. I love that. And I think we should probably mention too that people don't really submit to you. You sort of seek folks out, right? Or is it a mix of both?
Well, when I was running a publishing company, I looked at 1,500 full-length manuscripts a year. And we also had a magazine and there were submissions there. So I spent a great deal of my time just sort of wading through submissions, many of which were good, but there just wasn't room for them. So when I started Vox Populi, I decided that I would seek out the authors myself rather than read everything that people sent me. And I've solicited people like Naomi Shihab Nye and others, and many of them have said yes and sent me something to publish. So it is not, Vox Populi does not accept unsolicited contributions. Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, I just thought, oh dear, tomorrow you're going to have 700 submissions in your email box as they seek you out. So I wanted to
That's
be
fine.
clear.
I won't read them. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. Finally, George, I wondered if you could just tell us, how do you maintain your joy? I mean, really, I just am in awe of all that, because I know you've been through, well, we know from your poetry you've been through a lot. But we also know that you're, a college professor, and there have been, so many financial cuts and programs cut, and you watch your students have successes and failures. And through that all, though, I've never seen you not be upbeat. I mean, I'm sure there are times you aren't, we're not asking that, but how do you maintain that joy? It's just amazing.
That's a great question, Carrie. Yeah, I mean, if you're teaching in the humanities right now in the university, it every day brings a fresh wave of bad news and financial cuts and so forth. And we weather them as best we can and figure out ways of keeping our programs going and bringing in poets like you. We were so happy to have you last year at John Carroll. So we look for ways of making it keep on happening. So you have to be really resourceful right now. It's a dark time in the humanities. The emphasis is elsewhere, but I think the pendulum will swing back in due time. And in my private life, I'm kind of weird in that I'm this really old guy, but I've got 2 young kids. I've got a 6-year-old, and as of yesterday, a 10-year-old. He was 9, and then he became 10. And most poets my age at this point, they've kind of, you've gone through your great themes and everything, and you've talked about them over and over, and you're probably getting kind of sick of writing about them. But I have a whole new theme. I've got these kids to write about in old age, or relatively old age. And so that really keeps me going. I mean, having kids later in life for me has been an incredible blessing. And as I say, having kids when you're older keeps you old. I mean, you are reminded of how old you really are. But you got lots of great stuff to write about. And so, yeah, that's my energy, that they're my muses. And years and years ago, probably 20 or 30 years ago, my friends started to have, my friend poets started settling down, giving up their wandering ways and having kids. And they started writing these poems that often featured diapers. And they were writing about like diapers as if they were holy. Oh my God, I held the diaper of my firstborn. And I started ragging them all the time about the beautiful diaper poems. And now here I am writing the beautiful diaper poems. It's so unfair. But anyway, that's what keeps me going. And, life is good, and let it continue. And I'm so proud and happy and excited, really, just to be part of the poetry community in the great state of Ohio, with people like you and Michael and Lynette and all the people I know in this city and in this state who are keeping the arts going and making us all so excited about being a part of this great project of pushing forward with the arts. So, and I want to thank you again. You've been an incredible laureate. I would ask you, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How do you keep going? Because I look at what you're doing, I see your name popping up everywhere. I would think you exist in a state of perpetual exhaustion. How do you do it?
George, to be perfectly honest, I am finally, because I went to Seattle a couple of weeks ago.
AWP.
Yeah, for AWP, and there was a 3-hour time change, and then we had the daylight savings time change, and then as I said, Lynn and I then went right into another conference. Thank goodness it was here in Athens, Ohio, at Ohio University. But I'm pre-diabetic, and so it really, that time change messed with me very badly, because as a diabetic, I count on things happening exactly at the same time every day, pretty much, as far as food intake and exercise, and everything was so screwed up. So I am a little bit wonky right now, and I am a little bit tired. But beyond that, like you, George, I'm an older person, and I keep reminding myself, I don't do this now. When will I do it? And so I hate to tell anybody no. I think I gotta go. I gotta have that adventure, because if I don't do it now, I won't get it done. So that's kind of my mantra, Oh, why not?
You're doing it, and we're all so grateful.
Well, thank you. And so many people have been so good and come along, and I always love it when people join me and we all get to raise our voices. That's quite joyful for me. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
So I want to say I look forward to seeing everyone in April and May. And I will host amazing folks such as Hanif Adurquib, James Cruz, Wanda Chang, and there are many, many more that will be joining me. I want to thank George and Lynette and Michael again for being with me tonight. I want to thank Devin and all the good folks at Stuart's. I want to thank our ASL interpreters, Nico and Joe, for being here this evening and dancing out our words as we spoke. I want to thank all of you who came out tonight and all of you who will stream later. Without you, we have no purpose. So thank you so much. I want to encourage everyone to stay happy like George has taught us to do, and also Michael tonight, and also Lynn. And stay safe, everyone, okay? We love you so much. So good night and God bless.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.